All right. Well, this is my first day doing this, and I've been having almost too much fun doing this, actually. I think the thing I've been enjoying is sitting here mumbling and rambling like Dustin Hoffman and not actually talking in a very clear, coherent ways. I typically, when I present, well, I guess when I was younger, I think I used to present in a very powerful way. I think the older I've gotten, the more I've allowed myself to become as sloppy as possible. I think these videos I'm extremely sloppy, and I'm using every kind of stuttering and stammering and muttering and mumbling that I possibly can. And I think I'm doing it because I'm just being natural, I guess, on the one hand, but also on the other hand, it's enjoyable to just kind of show these character flaws in this character I've created online. So I'm kind of enjoying this. Over time, you will learn about who this person is, the defeated soul. I guess I'm enjoying just the notion of this defeated soul, and a gradual learning of who this person is, and demonstrating flaws right off the bat, that maybe he is defeated in fact. So, and I'm feeling like I feel more and more like an old man, just rambling on, especially in these last several videos. I've just been mumbling on like an old man, and I'll try not to do that maybe in the future, but right now I'm enjoying it, so I think I'll continue doing that. The nice thing is I've got this great microphone, so I can kind of mumble right into the microphone. I don't have to actually speak up or project or anything like that. I can just sit here and mumble to myself, and it picks up my language pretty nicely. So, all right. So I'm laying out a claim against psychology, and the first claim I've made is that psychology makes oughts, in other words, shoulds or should not, claims that you should do this and you should not do that. But science has no claim on that, right? That's not science to say that you should or should not do that. I mean, how could you possibly come up with a single scientific experiment that could investigate whether a should or should not exist? The second claim I made is that there is no categorization. So these are very large claims I'm making right now. I'm making big principal claims here. Is that categorization does not belong to the study of science either. And this seems to be, actually, I'm noticing this a lot, actually. People are claiming this is science, that the study of categorization is science. And even if it does belong to science, if you want to say it belongs to science, it's nothing special if it does. I mean, all you're doing is you're looking at a set of traits in a particular category, and then you're looking at particular things that belong to that category, that have similar traits, right? Things that have those traits are things that belong to that category. In other words, you have like a category as a scope or definition, and to determine whether something belongs to that category, you just see if it has those traits that fall into that definition. That's all there is to it, really, I think, unless I'm missing something. And that is something that existed far before science. And so to say, I guess what I'm saying is, number one, I don't think that's science, because science, I think, is more about the scientific method, right? When the scientific method came on the scene, that was the great discovery of science. But two, even if it is science, we shouldn't treat it like this is some kind of, perfection of proof, which is what people do. They hear something from a scientist, and they feel that they've perfected their proof of some kind, that like this is perfection. A scientific claim is perfect. And the only reason why we ever made those claims that science has this kind of high level of truth value is because of the scientific method, I think, is why we've made those claims. And but to claim that this is true for categorization, why would you assert that? So those are my first two attacks. First is the attack on ought. Second is the attack on categorization. Third, well, I figure, why don't we apply some of this maybe? I'm not going to create a third category of attack, but rather maybe examine some of this. So let's look at depression. So depression, I think under psychology is typically viewed as a bad thing. People can say, no, it's not considered bad. We don't use that word in psychology. A lot of people might say that psychology doesn't do that. Okay, so it's a disorder, right? I think the word, the prefix dis implies something bad, I believe. But then I know there's going to be somebody out there who's going to say, no. The dis in front of the order is not implying something bad. I'm not sure what that means then, if it's not implying something bad. I think it implies that there's something wrong with you, right? Or at least there's something that needs to be fixed, or something that's out of whack, right? I mean, these are... I think that means bad. I think. And I know this is a big thing for people. They say, well, we need to stop. What's the word they keep using? People make the claim that using the word disorder creates a stigma, or they don't even claim that it's that the use of the word disorder. Rather, people have this problem with stigmatizing people for psychological health reasons. But well, that's what the word disorder does, right? I'm not even talking about the word stigma. I'm not even talking about stigmatizing. I'm just talking about disorder. The word disorder means there's something wrong, right? Like that. That's what that means. I mean, am I wrong on this? I know. I'm sure someone's going to have a counter argument on this one, because I know that there are people who claim that psychology is not making claims of rightness or wrongness. So I guess go ahead and counter me on that. But I mean, what does the word disorder mean if it doesn't mean that? So this idea of depression. So then they have I guess I was talking to someone else earlier this week about the idea, and they said, well, clinical depression is different from depression. Okay, so I guess I'm referring to clinical depression then, the definition used in the DSM, or used in psychology. But it seems to me that there's a belief that if you are clinically depressed, you need to be healed or fixed, or in other words, made not depressed. That being depressed is not what you should be, but being happy is what you should be. Are you seeing already, going back to that first principle I mentioned earlier, this idea of should and should not? There is without doubt this claim in psychology that you should be one or the other. I don't think anyone in psychology would claim that you should be clinically depressed. I really don't think that's the claim they're making. I think they're making the claim that you should not be clinically depressed, and that claim has nothing to do with science. So now you can see the principle that I previously proposed, and now the application of that principle, and the conclusion. And the conclusion here is that science has nothing to say about whether one should or should not be depressed. How could science have any say on that? Science is about the objective study of what is, right? I don't even want to use the word objective so much, but it's about the study of what is, about the observation of the real world. That has nothing to do with should or should not. So that's the first problem with depression. The second problem, though, is I think I can present a counter argument and say, you know what, maybe you should be depressed sometimes. And I've heard that psychologists will say that even. They'll go, yes, you should be depressed sometimes. The problem is when it becomes long-term and etc. They say that if that depression lingers on for more than a reasonable time, something like that, along those lines. I look at the literature again. I'm not sure exactly how they say it, but I've certainly heard their answer to that, and they'll say yes, some level of depression is okay, some level of depression is normal, but anything beyond a certain period of time is pathological after a while. That's what they'll say. Okay, so I want to put forth an example of, let's say, someone who's been in a concentration camp their whole life. Let's say Auschwitz. And while they were in Auschwitz, they saw their entire family tortured in front of them and murdered in front of them viciously. And let's say that they lost all their friends in Auschwitz or something like that. And let's say that every single possible level of hell you can imagine existed for that person in Auschwitz. Maybe that person was tortured themselves. Maybe Mengele was there. Dr. Mengele was torturing that person. When this person comes out of this, I expect the person to be depressed. Now, many people say, well, that's, yeah, psychology doesn't deny that. Psychology will say that it's normal for that. Okay, well, hold on. Let's imagine the person was happy. What would the psychologist say to that? What if right after this happened, the person is freed from this terrible ordeal and is like very happy about it, right? Very happy about life. Not happy about it, but happy about life. I would assert the claim that person is psychologically pathological. If that person is happy after all that, that would be the wrong response to have. Okay, so firstly, I want to point that out in that there are actually times I believe it's wrong, it's delusional and pathological to be happy. In fact, I would call this maybe delusional happiness or pathological happiness, or my favorite term is unjustified happiness. If you have unjustified happiness, to me that's disgusting. It really is disgusting. If you were happy after living through all that, my goodness. Now, let's go a bit further, though. Let's say this person is sad, depressed, right? And let's say the depression lasts for 20 years, 50 years, their entire life. Now, at some point, the psychologist is going to say, well, that's pathological. Well, I might counter that and say, no, it's not pathological. In fact, when you've seen that level of hell, when you've seen such a hell where you see your parents die in front of you, where you see your family die in front of you, where you see everyone tortured and your friends die, and you were tortured yourself, where you've lived through Auschwitz, and if you went through that and you didn't recover, ever, I would say that's proof that you're a normal person. Not just normal, but that's proof that you're actually psychologically functioning well. You shouldn't be happy after all that. In fact, it should absolutely be catastrophic to your entire life. You should never ever get over it. Never ever get over it, ever. Now, the claim I made, is an assertion without a whole lot of proof. I'm not putting forth like a beautiful deductive proof behind this. I don't have any great premises. That's not my point. My point is not to prove my point here, actually, in fact, but simply to put the point on the table. I think that it can be argued fairly well, actually, and at least convincingly anyway, that indeed a person under that circumstance should never get over it. So now we have a debate, right? We got one side is saying that you should be very depressed. The other side is saying that you should be very happy, or at least after a certain number of years, and after 20 years, after 25 years, you should get over it. Is the claim here? I'm making the claim that you should not. The other side is making the claim that you should. I don't care which side is right or wrong. I mean, to some extent, I'll make that argument, but I don't care which side is right or wrong. Here's my point. Can a psychologist answer that question? Did the psychologist come up with some perfect experiment that, oh, Eureka, I did this experiment, and I proved that this is the answer instead of this. That this is pathological and this one is not. Really? You have a scientific experiment to prove to me that to be happy after 20 years, after leaving Auschwitz 20 years later, that is not pathological, but to not be happy is pathological. You have proof of that? You have a way of proving that? Really? Scientifically? Using the scientific method using experiments and hypotheses and independent variables, dependent variables. You have a way of proving that, really. You have a way of proving whether or not it is pathological to be happy 20 years after leaving Auschwitz. I would love to see your scientific proof of that. Let me think about that carefully. How would you go about proving that scientifically? Because that's exactly what these psychologists will claim. A psychologist will make these claims. And they'll claim it as if it's true. And they'll say it with such confidence as to say, well, yes, I'm a psychologist, therefore, blah, 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 blah. Right? Prove it. In fact, if there's a psychologist out there right now listening to this video, I challenge you to prove that to me. Prove to me that 20 years after you leave Auschwitz, you should be happy. And to maintain some kind of depression 20 years later is pathological. Prove that to me. Using science. You can't. Now, I know what you're going to claim. You're going to say, well, it's not normal. Because normality is determined by looking at the majority of people. I don't give a damn if it's normal or if the majority feels a certain way. Why would you tie the definition of pathological to the definition of normal? In other words, you're saying there's an inverse relationship, right? You're saying that if you are normal, you are not pathological. If you're pathological, you're not normal, right? The tie between those two words, did you prove that with a scientific experiment? You see, this is categorization now. You see, this is the second flaw I was talking about, is you have this category called pathological depression, and you're saying that it is pathological, that something of this, that depression of this magnitude that lingers for 20 years is by nature pathological. Well, that's a category. Categorization is not part of the scientific method. Remember, look back at my previous video, right? Categorization is simply when you take a term, you define the category, you define the scope, right, and then you figure out something fits under that scope. That's not science. That's not science. So the determination of whether a thing is pathological or not has nothing to do with science. You will not have a single scientific experiment to back that up, will you? You can't. Because a scientific experiment can only show one thing: a relationship between two variables, independent and dependent variable. That's the only thing that an experiment can prove. So, on the one hand, we could say that, yeah, it's bad to be depressed. Well, but you can't prove it scientifically. On the other hand, you could say that, well, it is good to be depressed. And that's kind of the claim I was putting forth. I can't prove that scientifically either. But that's my point. Is neither of us can prove it scientifically. You psychologists are out of your realm. Right? This is something for philosophers to deal with, not for you. Because philosophers have an expertise in understanding categorization. Like I said, Aristotle wrote the book on categories. That's a philosopher's book. The book on categories. I mean, it's fundamental to all of philosophy. This is not your study. This is not your field. So if you want to categorize something as depressing, as being pathological or not, as depression being pathological or not, or something belonging to depression even, any of these categories, you can't do it scientifically. You can do it using the other methods that the philosophers use, but you're out of your realm, right? Like why should we trust your definition over everyone else's definition? That's my claim, and I think I've demonstrated the claim. I've done it through rambling here. I really got to stop doing these rambling videos. I usually like to prove things in a much more deductive format. You know, I like to actually show my premises and conclusions and things. I'm not really doing that so much here, but hopefully you guys get the gist. All right. If you want to challenge me, Bring it. Challenge me. See ya.